Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Let's Learn English Online. Today we are going to discuss the 50 sentences that will help you to speak English while cooking in a kitchen. So let's get started. Before moving on, don't forget to subscribe the channel and also don't forget to hit the bell icon below for more informative videos. I am going to start by preheating the oven to 375 degrees. This recipe calls for 1 cup of flour. Can you pass me the black pepper, please? I need to chop up some onions for this dish. Do we have any garlic left? I'm going to saute the vegetables in olive oil. The chicken needs to marinate for at least an hour. I'm going to put the water on to boil for the pasta. Could you help me stir the soup? Let's check if the chicken is cooked all the way through. I think we need to add a bit more seasoning to this sauce. Don't forget to grease the baking dish before we put the casserole in the oven. This recipe requires a food processor. Can you help me peel the potatoes? I'm going to put the pie in the fridge to chill for a few hours. Let's make sure the rice doesn't boil over. We need to preheat the grill before we start cooking the burgers. I'm going to add some red pepper flakes for a bit of spice. This recipe has a lot of steps, but it will be worth it in the end. Do you have any thyme or rosemary for this recipe? The recipe calls for unsalted butter, not regular butter. I am going to add a bit of honey to this sauce to balance out the acidity. Can you help me mix the batter for the pancakes? Let's make sure the meat is cooked to the proper temperature before we serve it. I am going to use a hand mixer to blend the ingredients together. We need to let the dough rise before we bake the bread. I am going to use a pastry brush to paste the turkey. This recipe requires a lot of patience, but the end result will be delicious. Can you help me chop up the herbs for the salad? We need to let the soup simmer for at least an hour for the flavors to develop. I am going to add some grated cheese to the top of the casserole. The recipe calls for a tablespoon of vanilla extract. Let's make sure the pan is hot before we add the oil. Can you help me measure out the ingredients for the cake? We need to let the chocolate chips melt before we stir them into the batter. I am going to use a whisk to mix the eggs together. Let's make sure the pasta is al dente before we drain it. This recipe requires a lot of chopping, so it's best to prepare everything in advance. Can you help me roll out the dough for the pie crust? We need to let the dough rest before we shape it into loaves. I am going to use a thermometer to check the temperature of the meat. Let's make sure the sauce doesn't burn by stirring it constantly. Can you help me peel and slice the apples for the pie? We need to let the cookies cool on the baking sheet before we transfer them to a plate. I am going to use a strainer to remove the seeds from the raspberry sauce. I am going to make a strawberry sauce. Let's make sure the oil is hot enough before we add the chicken. I am making steak for dinner. This recipe requires a lot of multitasking, so it's important to stay organized. Can you help me mix the wet and dry ingredients together? So this is it for today. See you in the next video. Just stay tuned with Let's Learn English Online for more informative videos.